Last week, the Chicago Bears took down the Carolina Panthers, proving that their claws were sharper than Carolina's. This week, there's another big cat on the menu. It's the Jaguars in London. Can they declaw Jacksonville and keep the roll going? We'll see right here on Bear Era. Welcome back to Bear Era. We wanted to thank everybody for the support of our debut episode. Make sure you are clicking to like and subscribe. The faster we grow, the more Bears-focused content we can continue to bring you. We really appreciate everybody tuning in. And if you've got a Bears fan in your life, make sure to tell them about it as well. Quick thanks to our primary partners that make all this happen for us. Blue Wire Podcast for having us on. We are now on Apple Podcasts as well as Spotify. So if you are an audio-only listener, you can find us there as well. And of course, Homage Clothing for making the entire crew look good the entire year. And if you click on the QR code on the screen, we get credit for anything you buy, whether it's Bears related or not. So again, supporting our partners helps support the podcast and helps us bring you more Bears-focused content. So last week we launched our first episode. Ciaran, how you feeling after episode 1?
It was awesome. It was great to get into it. This has been something we've been talking about for the last couple of weeks and kind of seeing what we were going to be able to come up with, what was the right timing for it. And I think we picked a good time. First podcast on Bear Era, and everybody was excited about the team after the game we got to talk about. So look, it was great. Obviously, to reiterate from last week, a big thank you for Trevor Sycamore coming on the show. Like, he's been, we mentioned last week, he was great, and we have some very interesting things lined up for the podcast. So again, as EJ has mentioned, please do subscribe, and we're going to bring you guys hopefully a jam-packed show every single week for this NFL season.
Yeah, it was a great kickoff. It's always nice to say they should dominate an opponent and then have them do it and create a win. Nice way to get started here on Bear Era. With that, we're going to kick into Top Trio, which is our way to kick off the show. 3 points of emphasis, one from Ciaran, one from me, and one from all of you. So we solicited audience questions again, and we've got one that we'll answer here in the number 3 spot. But Ciaran, what is your most interesting take on this Jaguars-Bears game coming up in London?
So obviously last week I mentioned on the show that it was defensive focused and we need to give the defense credit. I'm going to flip the switch this week. This week, I'm going to be talking about the offense. I was, full disclosure, I was at the Vikings game in London last week. So I was desperately trying to watch and listen to the Bears game as I was traveling back from Tottenham Hotspur Stadium to London Heathrow. So that was interesting. But the one thing so the amount of times I had to rewind plays, but really what I loved about last week, and I hope that this kind of can be the emphasis moving forward, is we wanted them to dominate. And it was a domination, but not what you would expect. The Bears dominated that game by controlling that game. And it was a little bit worrying at the beginning, obviously, big run by Chuba Hubbard, but we mentioned that on last week's show. The run game for the Panthers was going to be the thing to look at. But when we look at this now moving forward, obviously, I think Shane Waldron has put together a more balanced game plan. He's had the offense kind of working both in terms of the pass, but also the run, and they're feeding off each other. I think last week was the first time we see a defensive turnover and then straight away the Bears score a touchdown. We don't see that a lot. So things like that I really, really enjoyed. It's some of the things, look, obviously the second touchdown to DJ Moore, I messaged a bunch of my friends once that happened. I was like, that was one of the nicest touchdown throws I've seen in a while for a Bears quarterback. Yep. But then watching it back, what I actually liked was some of the things that maybe Caleb doesn't get the credit for that he probably does deserve. And it's him basically seeing off the safety with his eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't see a lot of rookies do that. And he's doing that 5 weeks into the season. 5 weeks into the season, he has 2 games of 300 plus yards. Now, we don't see that with Bears quarterbacks. So my emphasis this week for Bears fans, for this show, is get excited. Get excited about this offense. Get excited about Caleb Williams. Will there be ups and downs? Yes, there will be. But when the Bears put a performance like that, where you're seeing guys like, obviously Cole Kmet made a couple of really good plays. You're seeing Swift. You're seeing, I want to see more Roshan Johnson. I think he has been fantastic, even in the limited action that he's had. And the Bears put up 36 points, right? There could have been more. We have to remember Caleb Williams scored a touchdown, but there was a clipping. Then there was another time when, and this is where I think it's going to be more pertinent when you're coming against a good team and a better defense than the Carolina Panthers, is when DeAndre Swift scores that touchdown. You can't allow city flags to happen, because against other teams you may not score 2 plays after. So I think those are the things. But I think my main emphasis here is I want to see a continuation of what Waldron was able to do. Keep the balanced attack. If the run game is working, stick with it. Don't make the plays be like, I guess, when they're trying to get into the huddle, don't make it be too long. Caleb wants to get in, get out really quickly, because it's confusing the defense. And we saw that last week. And I want to see more of that. I really liked what I saw. And we're still in this stretch where there's teams you should beat.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sorry, I know that the Jaguars are a good team. They have good players. But at the end of the day, the Jaguars are 1-4. Mm-hmm. If I'm going to reiterate what I said last week on the show, if you want to be called a good team, if you want to be called a team that needs to compete for a playoff spot, you have to beat a team that has started 1-4 and kill their hopes of reviving their season. That's what the Bears need to do. That needs to be the point of emphasis. What the team meeting with Shane Waldron 2 weeks ago, I think, was really important, and that's what they have to do this week. Be aggressive on offense. If you have a chance to step on their throat, step on their throat, and don't let them back into games. Because if you can do that, and you can, like, if the Bears leave London and they're 4-2, the positivity within this fan base, within that organization, is going to be sky high, with still a couple of winnable games just around the corner. So that's what I want to see, more of the same, but also kind of building on the last 2 weeks that the Bears have looked good on offense, looked good on defense, be that compliment. And if they can do that, I think we have exciting times over these next couple of weeks.
Starting to build a winning culture, and a lot of that has come from the offensive balance that you mentioned. Shane Waldron is figuring it out now, whether the impetus for that was the players meeting or whether it's just, more time in the saddle with these players and figuring out what they do well. The offensive line worked better. The running game has worked better for 2 weeks. This last week, you really saw the passing game click into high gear. The touchdown throw that you mentioned to DJ Moore is notable because Caleb is being asked to do a big boy share of the work in terms of NFL quarterbacking. He is not being handed a game plan that is coddling him. He is calling protections. A lot of it is on him, and you don't typically see that with a rookie 5 weeks in. You are seeing with Caleb, and he is still picking up steam every week. That throw to DJ Moore, I also sent to people and said, this is a big boy NFL offensive throw. Look off the safety on the deep post, realize you've got one-on-one, put the ball in the right place on a line, which we all know he's capable of doing, but he still did it. In those situations in the first couple of weeks, we saw overthrows. He didn't. That was an absolute dime, and he's doing it on the hard level, right? This is not all rookie, difficulty level on Madden. He is getting the full plate and dealing with it extremely well. I, too, want to see that momentum continue because the defense played well again. I think we can continue to think that they're going to do that. if the offense builds on this momentum, what you're starting to build is this winning culture and this expectation that, hey, we are going to play complementary football and we're going to be a tough out. Whether or not we win, we are going to be in these games and we're going to be competitive. So my point of emphasis for the week is about defense, but not the Bears defense. This is about the Jags defense. It is another very bad defense on the docket this week. And a lot of people were quick to sort of undercut last weekend's success and say, well, it's against one of the worst defenses in the league. True. Bears didn't pick that, though, and they did exactly what you should do to a very bad defense. When I say the Jags defense is very bad, I mean in results, not necessarily in players. They have some very talented players, but they are the third worst scoring defense in the league. Only Carolina and Cincinnati, strangely enough, are worst. They're giving up 29 points a game. As a defense, they have the worst EPA per play versus the pass in the NFL. Like, that is a bad defense. You can have good players, but those are bad results. The run defense is only slightly better with the 9th worst EPA per play versus the run. Their pass rush is where they differ from the Panthers. They have a much better pass rush. Both Hines Allen and Walker are top 20 in pressures. So this will be more of a test for the newfound stability. And it feels weird to say that as a Bears fan, of the offensive line, but they have played much better and much more cohesively over the past couple of weeks. This will be a bigger test, but it's only a little bit bigger test, right? The pass rush is absolutely tougher, but we're ratcheting up the difficulty of opposing defenses little by little. It's not like they're suddenly going against, say, the Vikings a week after going against the Panthers. That would be like cranking it up to all Madden. Luckily, the Bears don't have to do that. So they can take a little bit more pressure, try and continue the success they've had on both sides of the ball, and see if they can keep this winning roll going. And if they do that, I'm with you. We are really on to something heading into the bye week. And there is going to be a groundswell, a build within the Chicago fan base of, ooh, look at what these guys are doing. They're playing complete football. You said some things about, hey, as Bears fans, we're not used to seeing that from a quarterback, or as Bears fans, we're not used to seeing quick change situations turn into touchdowns. Bears fans are going to get used to that stuff in a hurry. And if the Bears can keep this roll going in London, things are going to crank up very, very quickly. That brings us to our audience question of the week, or fan question of the week. And this one comes from Da Bears 32. How many more games until we can say Javon Dexter is a legitimate star? Ciaran, what's your answer? How many more games?
About two games ago.
-2?
-2. -2. Look, Javon has been the star that Eberflus has always wanted for this team. They polls as well. They obviously tried and failed with that first free agent signing. When everything broke down with Larry Ogunjobi, they wanted that 3-tech position. And then I remember the draft clearly, that everybody, media members and the like, the one player that it seemed like was getting critiqued the most was Javon Dexter. And I remember at the time talking to people from Florida, having them on various podcasts, all that sort of stuff, and they couldn't have spoken any higher about Javon Dexter. And that got me a little bit excited. And in his rookie year, we saw glimpses of it. And then you hear the noise in the offseason of where he's running the same sort of kind of conditioning work as the defensive ends and the linebackers. I'm like, that's interesting. Can he then, if he is slimmed down at all, will he still be able to increase that speed that he has, but also improve kind of, or keep the power? You don't want to subtract one from the other. Oh boy, has he been able to do that. And it's obviously the sacks are great, but the pressure, he's swarming the quarterback every time you're watching the play. Like the touchdown that Carolina scored, who wasn't on the field? Javon Dexter wasn't on the field. And I think everybody kind of openly criticized that at the time. But then you see the fumble happens, and who, obviously Kyler Gordon comes up with it. But who's the first guy diving over onto it? It's Javon Dexter. His motor this year has vastly been improved since what we saw from him last year. And honestly, if he can continue this trajectory, maybe we can discount Caleb Williams because I think he's going to be in the next stratosphere. He may go down as one of Ryan Poles' best draft picks.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think 0 games is the correct number until we can say Dexter's a legitimate star. He is among the league leaders in pressures and sacks from the defensive tackle position. We're talking about guys like Dexter Lawrence, who is far and away the best nose tackle in the NFL. Javon Dexter is right there and above him in some NFL statistics. That's ridiculous for a second-year player, and it speaks to the level of quality that he brings to that defense. He is in a, let's call it, linchpin role that Eberflus believes is central, key, important for that defense to run correctly. And he is providing, I think, everything Eberflus could want and more. He is a legit star. He's not going to achieve that stardom in mainstream media only because of the position he plays. It will be a slower role than if he was a wide receiver, if he was a top flight shutdown cornerback, if he was a quarterback. Like, those guys just get more eyeballs. Interior defensive linemen especially don't. But Dexter is going to demand them in very quickly. He already is for people who pay attention to that kind of thing. The rest of the world's going to come around very, very quickly. And I'm with you. I think that number is either 0 or negative games until you can say this guy has arrived and is influencing the outcome every single week. That'll take us to our guest spot for the week. One of my favorite people in NFL media and a Jacksonville insider, Mia O'Brien from 1010XL in Jacksonville. You'll see that interview right here. We are joined now by this week's guest, Mia O'Brien, NFL insider for 1010XL Radio in Jacksonville, to talk about her hometown Jags. How are you, Mia?
I'm doing fantastic, gentlemen. Just a lovely hurricane barreling towards the state of Florida right now. But a hurricane is coming across the pond to Ciaran and London, England. And that hurricane is the resurgent Jacksonville Jaguars. If I can't hype them up, gentlemen, I'm not really sure who can.
Oh, I just thought it was the bunch of Irish guys going across to London there.
The good news is I think there'll be some more rules on the plane compared to a year ago. Not that there weren't rules on a plane, but I think you all know what I'm alluding to, which that case was thrown out of a court this week. So I guess we can make jokes about the former kicker now, But anywho, hey, it's a party either way whenever the Jags come to London, and so it'll be a nice little 11-day stay across the pond with another back-to-back for the second straight year.
And with that, we're going to get into our questions so we don't waste your time, because it is a busy week for everybody. The way this works is we each get to ask you a question about the Jags, and then you get to turn it around and ask us a question about the Bears. So I'm going to let Ciaran lead off with his Jags question, and we'll go from there.
So obviously it's not been the start that a lot of Jags fans, media members, players, coaches wanted. Starting 1-4 is never ideal. But when we look at this kind of going forward, do you think that there can be an uptick in the performance level? Also, I guess, adding to that, an uptick in the actual results. So can they turn this season around? When you start 1-4, it seems like you're kind of petering towards a lost season, but then a good win last week against the Colts and getting to go to London to maybe kind of freshen things up.
So there's only been one team in the history of the National Football League to make the playoffs after starting 0-4. That was the Chargers in, I believe, 2006. And look, at this juncture, Christian Kirk said to me after they did fall to 0-4 in the locker room after the loss to Houston, look, at this juncture, we just got to go 1-0 each week and hope that that's enough to get us to where we want to be. And I think that this past Sunday was a resounding great start to that philosophy. Ultimately, when you look at the Jaguars season through the first 4 weeks, 3 of the 4 losses, we will throw the Monday Night Football abomination out the window. Hey, listen, the former Dallas Cowboys head coach Dave Campo, who I work with at 1010XL, has said to me, every team has a game like that during their season. The Jags just so happened to come on national television against the Buffalo Bills. Throw it out the window. The other 3 losses were all by 1 score. And in large part, you can pinpoint across 3 games, 3 to 4 plays that ultimately determined the outcome. Obviously, in the season opening loss to the Miami Dolphins, if Travis Etienne does not fumble the ball on the 2-yard line, the Jaguars go up 3 scores. I verbatim had reporters in the press box on the Dolphins beat behind me say, my goodness, if they score here, we're on to Thursday night in Buffalo. This one is over. And then the unthinkable happened. Etienne fumbles, and we all know what happened from there. Although the Dolphins, up until last week, still had not led in a single minute of an NFL game because, of course, they won that Week 1 matchup on a walk-off. Week 2 against the Browns, the defense showed up for the Jags. The offense did not. It's quite simple as that, yet they still found a way to be in the game and to have the ball in the final minute with a chance to go down the field and score. If you actually go back and you watch, second-year tight end Brenton Strange actually had a much better look at that Hail Mary in the end zone from Trevor Lawrence than I think a lot of people realize, and he showcased that skill set this past weekend when he did haul in a touchdown against the Colts. We'll get to him, I'm sure, at some point in time in this discussion. We throw out the Buffalo Bills, and then you go to the Houston Texans. Trevor Lawrence missed down the field to Christian Kirk. He missed down the field deep to Brian Thomas Jr. They hit those two. Again, we are talking about a completely different game. And for what it's worth, if the Jaguars defense, which looked a lot better in the second half against Nico Collins and CJ Stroud, if they had simply buckled up on that final drive of the ball game, then there's also a chance that we're talking about a 2-2 Jaguars team heading into the Indianapolis meeting in Jacksonville, a 3-1 team. And so what I just listed off to you was, I think, a grand total, gentlemen, of 5 plays. And that's the nature of the National Football League. If you talk to anyone who's been around the game long enough, that is what determines a competitive playoff team from a team that is not contending. The Jaguars know that better than anyone. If you go back to their 5-game losing streak in 2022, they lost each of those games when they fell to 2-6 on the season. They lost each of those games by 1 possession. Quite literally, as I was standing right there, Christian Kirk came up 1 foot shy of the end zone against the New York Giants, and that is why they lost that game. And so this is a team that, for the bulk and the core of this roster, has been through this before. So that is where I have optimism that they can turn this thing around. I'm glad, Ciaran, you phrased your question as kind of a 2-parter. Can the results be there? I believe the results can, especially when you look at this schedule for the Jags. The reality is they've only gone to London and played 2 games once before, and they went 2-0 last year. Prior to that, as much as London's the home away from home, there were certainly struggles. Trevor Lawrence, most notably, struggled against the Denver Broncos in that final weekend game in October of 2022. So it's not to say going to London is the cure-all in any stretch of the imagination, but certainly playing the Chicago Bears and the New England Patriots, if only on paper, a little bit easier of an opponent comparatively to the 4 playoff teams from a year ago that they faced in the opening month of the season. You get to 3-4, the whole season is back on the table. With that said, then you have to play the Packers, the Eagles in Philly, the Vikings, and the Lions. So that's going to be a little bit of a challenge for the Jags, needless to say. But then I look to after their bye. Those 6 games after the bye are all winnable. 4 of them are AFC South matchups, with the other 2, the Las Vegas Raiders in Las Vegas and the Robert Saleh-less New York Jets in Jacksonville. That back half of the schedule, and I know you gentlemen are familiar with this story, it eerily resembles for me, and in fact may be easier than the schedule the Buffalo Bills faced last year when they came off their bye. They knew that the margin for error was so thin, and they were able to navigate it successfully. And that's where I have hope for the Jags in terms of where the schedule falls. Perhaps it's the sunny disposition. I have this optimism that if only in the final results, the Jaguars could turn this thing around. The big picture question, which leads to, I know what EJ is dying to ask me. Schematically, at the core of this offense, I have questions. And I have had multiple people say to me, I'm entitled to my opinion. They know I do reporting. They know who I talk to. They know I talk to people. But ultimately, why are you writing off this marriage between Doug Peterson, Press Taylor, and Trevor Lawrence? And they could prove me wrong. But what I can tell you is that I have questions, big picture, about what the plans are for this offense. What is their identity? I have been screaming that now for the better part of a year and a half. No one can answer the question, what do the Jacksonville Jaguars do really well? Whether that is they're a tough-nosed defense, whether it's great offensive line play, whether it's they are a track team like the Miami Dolphins. I have asked people across the league. I have asked people here in Duval County. No one can answer that question. And for me, and I don't want to steal the thunder of I know what EJ's about to ask, but for me, much of that stems from philosophically on offense, what is the big picture goal? Is it wide zone? Is it run the ball first to set up the deep shot? Is it short, intermediate, we're going to dink and dunk you up and down the field Gardner Minshew style? The answer is they don't have an answer. And that is why big picture, even if the Jaguars can turn this thing around in the results department, the overall scheme has me wondering if it is a Band-Aid on a bullet hole to a bigger problem that will result and already has shown warts in the development of Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah, this is a talented franchise. They are not short on talent, really on either side of the ball. And to help answer that question, normally we would dig into the stats and you would hope the stats would lead you in a direction, give you support. And instead, this is one of those times where we dig into the numbers and they just sort of beg bigger questions. So the Jags offense is 22nd in yards per play when they pass, but second in yards per play when they run, which means you'd think, oh, they'd probably lean on running the ball for their offense. Despite those numbers, they've passed 177 times, 13th most in the league, and they've run it 111 times, which is only 27th most in the league. So the thing that they're best at is the thing they're doing at almost the league worst level. They're just not running the ball a lot, although they've found somewhat of an identity there, certainly with Tank. And passing the ball, we saw a much different Trevor Lawrence last week against the Colts. He looked like you would expect a first overall pick to look. His stats were wildly different than the first 4 weeks, although you talked about all the team stats and how close they were. Trevor's stats individually last week were standout. He was basically doing his job at a very high level, and he hasn't been throughout the season. So in your eyes, you're closer to this team than we are, which is why you're here, and we can't thank you enough for that. What do they have to do for the rest of the stretch that you so brilliantly laid out if they're going to get those results? We saw one good result against Indianapolis, but what if you were making the call? Would you want them to lean into more?
In the words of Leanne Tui, run the damn ball. And better yet, gentlemen, how about you lean into the philosophical approach of running the ball that at the very least, your new run game coordinator, who has been your offensive line coach for the last 2 years, you elevated him this offseason and charged him with taking the run game down to the studs. And in doing so, they decided to run it back with the same offensive line because this is an offensive line that, while yes, it is not the mean, in your face, in between the tackles, get into a bar fight type offensive line that I know some Jaguar fans crave, it does feature athletes along that offensive line that if you can get them out in space, you saw it on Sunday. Ezra Cleveland literally escorted Tank Bigsby into the end zone on his first touchdown. And so that is why I say, number one, this offensive line is, yes, certainly it's built to pass protect. It's five guys, and even if you want to go through the depth pieces, it's five guys who excel in pass protection. I've talked to many a former offensive lineman, including former co-host of mine, Leon Searcy, who have questions about that. That is ultimately the route that they went. But this group is finding success with that revamped run game that they spent all off season researching, tinkering with. They are finding success when you can get them out in space. And for what it's worth, the Achilles heel, even with the revamped run game, remains 3rd and 1, 4th and 1. Some of that is on the offensive line. Ultimately, for me, when it comes to the Jaguars' run game, and I know Doug Peterson was asked about this on Sunday, is Travis Etienne on the trade block? Is Tank Bigsby the new number one? Please go back to my tweets from November of last year, let alone all spring and all summer. Tank Bigsby is the best true running back on this roster. Travis Etienne, outside of Brian Thomas Jr., which if we want to get to that, we certainly can. Travis Etienne is the best pure football skill player on this roster. Those two things can coexist, and that's okay, because you want to know why? As EJ said, look how well you're running the ball. Better yet, for all those fans out there clamoring for the Jaguars to go lure Ben Johnson down to Duval County, what are they doing in Detroit, gentlemen? Oh, that's right. They have two great running backs. There's some days that it's a David Montgomery day, and there are some days that it's a Jahmyr Gibbs day. It is largely based on what the defense is presenting for you. And as for Trevor's career-high 371 yards through the air on Sunday, that's a great example of this team. While it can be a struggle because they want to air it downfield, that is a great example of this team being disciplined and saying, we know Gus Bradley's defense. We're just going to take everything under the umbrella until it opens up the deep shot. And taking everything underneath can be bubble screens, it can be short passes, it can be slant routes, intermediate crosser. That's all included. And so is the run game. And I will leave by saying this to answer your question. Trust me when I say I've heard from multiple people that sometimes you have to remind Press Taylor, just keep running, just keep running, just keep running. And, and they did on Sunday outside of the final 4-minute drill, just like they forgot to run the ball in the final 4 minutes against the Houston Texans. They run the ball there. That's also probably another reason that they could have won that game as well. I hope that answers your question.
That answers my question and a lot of other questions, which is awesome, which is the whole reason we brought you on. And yes, do you remember what I said to you when you guys drafted BTJ?
Oh, you said that's the move. And we actually talked about it on my show, Helmets and Heels, today.
Yep.
I don't want to go out on a limb and say this, but I heard Daniel Jeremiah and, of course, our good friend Bucky Brooks, the sideline reporter for the Jags, say it on Move the Sticks this week with Rhett Lewis, so I don't feel bad in saying it. When in doubt, take the second LSU wide receiver. That's no knock on Malik Neighbors. That is no knock on Jamar Chase. They are both also top 10, top 15 talent in the league. But Jay Jettas, Brian Thomas Jr., I'm just saying. I mean, you could go back to, I guess Jarvis was drafted after OBJ, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, hey, look, when in doubt, take the second one. Or at least that's what the early results suggest.
Yeah, I'll take any of the six, thanks.
Yeah,
but
that's
no.
true.
Good core overall. All right, Mia, it's time for you to ask us a question about the Bears, as painful as that may be.
Yeah, let's do it. So I want to stay with the run game. Woo! We love offensive line talk. And it's also a two-parter for you gentlemen. So I'll let, I guess, EJ, if you want to take the first, or Ciaran, if you want to take the first, I'll let you guys decide who goes first. Let's begin with pass protection. Mm-hmm. So Caleb was sacked 14 times in the first 3 games of the season, 4 times the last 2. Is that a case of the offensive line gelling, or a case of sacks are a quarterback stat?
For me, there's one common factor in the last 2 games versus the first 3. There's a certain offensive lineman that is not playing the last 2 games. We've seen, I said this earlier on in the week, the difference in the last 2 games versus the first 3 is the offensive line just look like they want it more, where they're trying to put their lives on the line for their quarterback, which the first 3 games it didn't seem that way. And look, I think it's a bit of both in terms of you have your rookie and the offensive line trying to come together when there's so many injuries. Like you have Tevin Jenkins has been up and down. Nate Davis basically didn't practice for the entire offseason. You had, I think they were relying on Ryan Bates to play a bit of, maybe to kind of play center and then see what would happen with the offensive line. And then when he went down and went on IR, it kind of messed everything up. The offense just wasn't very functional those first 3 games. Some of it you do have to put down to it's Caleb Williams' first couple of games. He's being asked to basically run the entire offense and not the coaches aren't making it easy on him. So when that happens, there can be a lot of miscommunication with the offensive line. I think that's what did happen. But then the last 2 games, you're seeing guys really put their bodies on the line to try and give Caleb that few extra seconds so he can make those reads and make the right decisions. And then I think a mindset for Caleb as well is you don't always have to throw the hero pass. It's like, if there is the dump off there, make it easy on the offensive line, make them look better and make yourself look better. And I think that's what's happened. There's been a bit more aggressiveness. Like, you even saw Tevin Jenkins play quite well at the start of the game against the Carolina Panthers. He goes down. Then Bill Murray, yes, Bill Murray for a Chicago-based team, he came in and he played really well. And it's just, it goes to the point of, I think they finally worked together as a unit. And it seemed like in the first 3 games that just wasn't happening. And there was gaps all over the place. Guys weren't picking up late blitzes. And these are some of the things, and different stunts were really confusing the offensive line. And it seems like, I don't know if it's just to do with guys getting used to each other in real-time action, but they actually look like they're working together. It's the one position we always hear coaches say is these guys have to work in unison. If one guy isn't doing their job properly, the entire offensive line looks terrible. And I think for the last 2 games, we've kind of seen that happen. And you got to hand it to the guys that have come in that weren't prepared maybe to be starters, but have come in and played really well in Pryor and Murray. And I think that's kind of been the main change. I think the mindset, but also guys look a bit more prepared these last 2 weeks.
Yep, we've heard that a time or two in Jacksonville. Of it's the line needs time to play with each other. But to that same point of all the subs coming in, and that was when the Bears' offensive line gelled. The Houston Texans, statistically speaking, were the most banged up offensive line in football last year, and you could argue they looked better last year than they do this year, in which they've had less players go down with injury. The second part of my question for you, EJ, was regarding the run game with said offensive line. Is DeAndre Swift on a milk carton, or what exactly is going on with that run game?
Well, if you'd asked this same question 2 weeks ago, I would have said yes. And a lot of the reasons that Ciaran alluded to are the same reasons that was the case up to 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, the run game got in line. And that has to do, as we all know, very strong correlation to the offensive line getting their act together. And when you say gelling, it's interesting because there's still been a lot of rotation. They've had a lot of different players on that offensive line. But Mia, you may not know this, the players, and this is just wild to me, the players had a sit down with Shane Waldron about 2 weeks ago. Yeah, right? Your rookie quarterback sits your offensive coordinator down with a couple of other veteran leaders and says, hey man, I need you to be more aggressive. Which is bananas to think that needs to happen that way and not the other way around, because that's typically the way I think most NFL fans would see it. But that occurred 2 weeks ago. They had a sit down in the meeting and said, hey man, you're wasting second downs. I mean, I paraphrasing, of course I wasn't at the meeting. We need you to be more aggressive. We're not feeling it. We are playing behind the sticks and it's screwing us up. That's when you started to see the run game and DeAndre Swift and the offensive line and protection and Caleb's success rates all rise at the same time, like together. So up to 2 weeks ago, it looked like a failed free agent signing. It was bad. DeAndre Swift has a lot of physical talent. He does not have great vision. Like, he can be a very successful NFL back. His vision is borderline non-playable. But if you give him limited choices and wide alleys, he could take advantage of them. And we've seen that over the last 2 weeks. He's done it beautifully. He is an asset in the outside pass game, which is a substitute for the run game a lot of times. If you ask him to do more complicated pick and poke stuff through the middle, he's going to look terrible. He's going to run into his own lineman. He's just not great there. We even saw it on the goal line. Like, he had a hole to the right on the goal line on that play that he got body slammed on. He literally jumped over the back of his offensive lineman when there was a hole to the right. He does not have great vision, but he's very physically talented. And they found a way to unlock that in the last 2 weeks, which might be the breath of fresh air he needs to continue and not make it look like one of the worst free agency signings, not only because it wasn't producing anything 2 weeks ago, but also because they jumped on it first. Like, it was the first day of free agency. He was the first running back sign, and they paid big money for him. And it was like, even at the time I thought, well, it's not what I would have done first necessarily, but they must have really liked him. And he comes out for the first basically month of the season and looks terrible. And the rest of the team looked terrible too. There's been a serious turn. It's almost like the turn that Jacksonville took against Indianapolis. Looked non-functional, looked confused, looked out of sorts. All of a sudden, over the last 2 weeks, the Bears don't look any of those things, and the whole offense, including DeAndre Swift, is looking much better. I still think, as you alluded to earlier, like the Lions and so many other teams around the league, this can be a combo platter with Roschon Johnson. And I would like to see a little bit more Khalil Herbert, too, because I think he is a very talented, big hitter of a back. He's proven that over the last couple of years. Like, this could be a three-headed monster in the backfield, and we've started to see an offensive structure that might allow that to happen. So I'm hopeful that it could going forward, whereas if you'd asked me what my hopefulness level was 2 weeks ago, it was in the can. There was very, very little hope for this. So it's nice to be at a similar place that you're at with the Jags right now, which is, hey, it's always sunny in London. Maybe that doesn't really work, but yeah,
apparently
we've
it's going
got
to
hope
rain
for
the
our
entire
teams.
time. I just heard before I left the station, I heard it's going to rain the entire 11 days that they're there. So
Of
yeah,
course.
but sunny disposition.
Yes, sunny dispositions all around. So with that, we will let you sign off. Go get ready for the hurricane. Thank you so much for gracing us. We are always thrilled when you can drop by. We will have you back for sure. And enjoy the tilt across the pond.
Appreciate it, friends. Looking forward to doing it again real soon. Slaint, right? Did I say that right?
Slancha.
Close.
Always great to have Mia on, an encyclopedic resource of knowledge about the Jags, and ever enthusiastic. Like I said at the top of the interview, one of my favorite people in NFL media. Got to meet her at the Combine in person for the first time last year and just really enjoy her work. This was the perfect opportunity to bring her on to Bear Era. What'd you think, Ciaran?
I feel like, EJ, we get her on, makes me feel more at home as well. Getting another person that I can call one of my own as well. It's I know, look, Mia's great. I love her enthusiasm to the game. Like you said, kind of that encyclopedic knowledge of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Very, very good. I think everybody's going to be able to, you're going to be able to tell that very quickly with that interview. And it was, yeah, she's fantastic. And again, a massive thank you to Mia for coming on the show. And yeah, it's been great just being able to talk Bears and Jags, getting the lead up to this big game at the weekend that I cannot wait for.
That brings us up to our very own insider, our super talented producer, Mike Mercado, and we give him a minute each week to bring his insights to you. So we give you Mike on the mic.
Happy Week 6, Bears fans. Welcome to Mike on the Mic. I'm producer Mike Mercado. Here we like to highlight a player, a matchup, or a storyline going into each Bears game. And this Week 6 matchup sees the 3-2 Chicago Bears travel across the pond to take on the 1-4 Jacksonville Jaguars in London, which has me putting the spotlight on the Chicago Bears coaching staff. I want to see if Eric Washington can scheme and contain Trevor Lawrence, Tank Bigsby, and Travis Etienne. If this Bears defense could get turnovers and turn those turnovers into points. I want to see if Shane Waldron can game plan for Caleb Williams and his receivers and this running game to continue its development and to build its chemistry we've seen over the last few weeks. And I want to see if Matt Eberflus can put it all together and see if his Bears team put pressure on this Jacksonville Jaguars team. You have to become a 4-2 team going into your bye week. You need to take care of business, and you need to handle this London trip like it is a business trip. That is why we are spotlighting Eric Washington, Shane Waldron, Matt Eberflus, and the entire Bears coaching staff here on Mike on the Mic. Now back to EJ and Ciaran.
Thanks to Mike for his thoughts this week. That wraps it up for us. Ciaran, any final thoughts heading into this game across the pond in London, closer to you than to us?
Yeah, I will be at this game. So I'm hoping for an absolute... Look, I want to see similar to last week. I want to see touchdowns. I want to see Caleb Williams. I will be there in the press conferences afterwards, so I can't wait to hear from some of these guys and just kind of getting their insights of coming over to London, because a lot of these guys will be the first time that they're even going to be traveling out the country, but also it's an incredibly important game. The last thing that I will say is I am very proud of the Bears and Ryan Poles from learning from past mistakes from this organization and actually leaving on time for the game and not arriving on a Friday afternoon for a Sunday game, getting themselves acclimatized, allowing the guys to have a bit of a break and to kind of get used to the time difference, but to see a little bit of London, and then suddenly it's practice, get ready, win the game, and then go home and enjoy the bye week. That's what we want this week, and that's what I hope the Bears get this week.
Yeah, coming in on a little bit of a roll. We're hoping to keep our roll going here on Bear Era. We couldn't do that without our supporting partners. Again, big thanks to Blue Wire Podcast for having us on the network, and to Homage Clothing. Again, click on that link on the QR code on screen. We get credit for anything you purchase, whether it's Bears gears or otherwise. Some of the softest and best gear you'll ever wear. You won't be sorry if you hook up Homage. And they, of course, continue to support us, help us make more content for all of you. And with that, we will see you all next week.